Hello, boils and ghouls. Welcome to the Horror After Dark podcast in the sack with JT. You know the drill. You hop in the bed with me in the sack. We end up talking horror films. It's a blast. Now, this movie is a film I've wanted to talk about coming up in June on 2 years since starting the channel. And this is David Pryor's The Empty Man from 2020. We have James Badgedale in here, Marin Ireland, Stephen Root, who's in fucking everything, always plays a blind person. We have the detective, I forget who plays the detective, the black guy, but I've seen him before. And we have Sasha Frolova. Let's start with this. This movie is so criminally underseen and just never heard of by so many people, and a lot of this had to do with the COVID epidemic. This film was released, it was right at the height of COVID, and everybody wasn't going to the theater, so no one saw it really. And it was also, the trailer doesn't help it. It's one of those stupid trailers that, you know, makes it look like a completely different film, and it was being compared to shit films like The Bye Bye Man and other ones like that, The Whatever Man. So a lot of people slept on this. And let me tell you this. This film is the fastest film to crack my top 20 movies of all time. This is my 19th favorite film of all time. And I think this movie is pure genius. And I know a few friends out there who feel the same way. But there are fans out there like us for this movie and recognize this as the brilliant masterpiece that it is. Now, this movie is definitely not for everybody. I can absolutely say that. This is over 2 hours. It turns into a Lovecraftian type film. We have James Badgedale playing James Lasambre, who is a former detective, and he ended up losing his wife and their son, and they died in a car accident a year before the events of this movie. So his neighbor, Nora, is a widow, and her daughter is Amanda. And then a little plot synopsis for those who haven't seen it, which is a lot. After Amanda goes missing from her house, since they're neighbors, they know each other a long time, Nora, the mom, asks James to come and, check around, investigate, and he ends up going down this rabbit hole into a whole cult Lovecraft type thing. Please check this film out if you have not heard of it or have not seen it. Like I said, this and The Haunting of Julia are the two fastest films, like from first watch, masterpiece, and in my top movies ever made. I think that's stunning. So Haunting of Julia last year, and it instantly cracked the top 20 for me. And same with this film. So, and these are the only post 2010 movies, I think, that are on my top 40 films list. But let's hop into The Empty Man from 2020. I am so psyched for this. This is such an amazing film. I talked to Ginger Ninja about this. I recommended this movie to him last year sometime, and he checked it out. He loved it. And this movie is the type of film that has a lot of fucking questions and interpretations and just theories and stuff. So to go along with this podcast episode, I'm going to have a stream near the end of the month with Ginger or Lauren. If you want to join that would be great. Now, James Badgedale's performance in this is great. I really, really love his performance. Same with the girl, I forgot her name already. Amanda. She does a great job. Nora, there's no bad acting in this movie. It's all top tier, great acting from everyone. I mean, Amanda's actress, she could overact a little tiny bit in a few tiny scenes, but barely noticeable, and you move right past it. We also have Aaron Poole in here, which brings us to the first 20 minutes of this film. Is one of the greatest opening 15-20 minutes to a movie I've ever seen. Ever. And a lot of people who've seen this movie and didn't care for it that I've talked to, they say that they feel like the beginning's excellent, and then it kind of goes down and weird for them. Now, I can see that because that 20-minute cold open we have here was written, and I don't know if it was filmed. It was written, though, way before this movie, and it was put on to the beginning of this movie. So it makes sense that it may feel disjointed to some people who don't, I don't want to say don't grasp the entire story of what's going on. It does make sense and fits in perfectly, like in my opinion. So we open up in 1995 in Bhutan, and four friends. Paul is Aaron Poole. Paul's the main important person. I don't remember the other people's names. Greg, I think, is one, and Rosa, I don't. Who cares? It doesn't matter. They go hiking on a mountain, and then they end up hearing. Well, Paul ends up hearing this weird sound, and he ends up going closer and closer to it, and ends up falling through the snow and stuff into like this cave. And when his friend Greg comes down to try to help him, he finds Paul in almost like pretty much a catatonic state, kneeling down or cross-legged in front of this skeleton, of this inhuman skeleton that's up against the edge of the cave wall down in this little hole that he fell down into in this little cavern. And he's absolutely non-responsive, and they see something obviously is wrong with their friend. It starts snowing like crazy, and they end up heading to try to find shelter, and they find this abandoned cabin. I mean, fortunately, what are the chances of that in Bhutan on a mountain? They found an abandoned shack? I mean, whatever. Now, like I did say, there are tons of theories, interpretations. You can go on forever trying to dissect this film. This is based off of a graphic novel of the same name, The Empty Man. And in the novel, I'm going to save this for later when we talk about the ending and, what everything means. But I know some people who say in the novel, and I've read it, that it differs from the movie here. Some people I talk to try to say that the movie here and what happens in the movie exactly is the exact same thing as the comic, which I do not agree with. So that's a whole thing we'll get into. Now let's talk the design of this fucking skeleton. The first time I saw this film, I thought it was one of the coolest looking props in a movie I've ever seen. And that's why, Lauren, I don't blame you for getting the tattoo. It is so creepy looking. It's so authentic looking. It's eerie as shit. It has a whole bunch of arms that a human being should not have, and it's obviously very, very old. And then we have Greg come down to try to help Paul, and Paul's praying in front of this thing in the trance, and ends up saying, breaking that trance, "Don't touch me. Don't touch me or you'll die." Of course, Greg fucking touches him. Aaron Poole doesn't get enough credit as an actor. Let me say that. His performance in this, I mean, in the beginning, he's not really in the rest of it till the end, and he's in a bed the whole time. But in the very beginning here, I love when Greg touches him, even though he was warned not to. His expression on his face, it's like he didn't want him to, because he knows what's going to happen. He portrays that perfectly on his face, like almost a tear. You can see his eyes swell up, like as soon as he gets touched, he goes, like in his head, that's what he's thinking, like, oh, why'd you do that? Now you're gonna die. They all look at Paul when they get him back to the cabin, and they deem that he's fine physically. Then they mention that he had some issues with depression and mental illness. And Greg's thinking it may be something like that. Then we go to the second day, and 3 is a major number in this movie, for there are 3 days it comes to calling the Empty Man. And we get this excellent scene on day 2. And again, whatever their names are, one of the girls ends up walking outside, and the rest of them went out looking to see if they can find help. And she ends up seeing this dark figure in like a cloak, almost like a dark black cloak. And God, man, just the tension that's built here with her stepping forward, and it's total blizzard, so you can barely see it. and she's looking and doesn't know what it is, and so she steps forward and it steps backward. So then it steps forward and she steps backward, and then it starts running full speed at her, and she freaks the hell out, and she runs into the cabin, slams the door at the last second, and then like 10 seconds later, the group, Greg and the other girl, end up knocking on the door, and they come in and they don't believe her at first. What a great scene. This is how you build tension. This is suspense. This is excellent writing. This is what it sucks that these are such rare films nowadays that are just on such a new level of greatness compared to all the other shit that comes out, especially mainstream horror. Another example recently is When Evil Lurks by Damien Rugna. This movie, that movie, those are the films that give me hope that there's still great ideas out there and there's great stories to be told. Right now, I always listen and pay attention to sound design as a musician. Just music and sound is very important to me and stands out all the time. This film has almost David Lynch level sound design. That's how good it is. During the night before day 3, the final day, when Paul reappears and they're sleeping and he's clicking with the clicking sound, whispering in her ear, and at first you just see the exterior shot of the cabin, and then you see her sleeping, and you hear the sound, and then it pans up, and you see him right by her ear going... Oh, it's so creepy. It's so effective. The sound design is top tier in this opening and in the entire film. So on the third day, they can't find Paul again. So they go out in this blizzard, still snowing like crazy. Fucking hate Bhutan, man. I would never go there. I am not a cold person. And they end up hearing him playing this flute, almost like blowing into a bottle, which we see characters do later on. Doesn't sound exactly like that, whatever. They find him, same position, cross-legged, sitting down, and they're asking, "What are you doing?" And he doesn't respond. Finally, he responds with 2 words. He says, he told him not to touch him. I've always taken that as the thing that she sees in the blizzard. That's the empty man. That's the whatever essence or energy or manifestation of the empty man. Which I guess the skeleton is the ancient remains of, I guess maybe if it was a physical being or an old vessel. Because we find out that Paul, and then later the cult tries to do the same thing with James Lasombra, turning him into the vessel for the empty man. And I think, as we also see a similar, if not the same looking figure in the scene where the girl gets brutally stabbed in the face in the shower a bunch of times, that looks so good. But Paul ends up just looking up at them, and the girl who saw the thing ends up brutally stabbing Greg a few times in the chest, pushes him off the cliff. Then she ends up slitting the other girl's throat, throws her ass off the cliff, and Paul stares at her for a little bit in the screen. I like how the screen distorts a bit. And then she just spreads her arms and she falls backwards off the cliff. And he continues to blow on his flute thing. We get the title card, The Empty Man. 22 minutes and 12 seconds. And it's opening logos and stuff. This is one of the greatest opening 20 minutes in a film for me. And what an amazing example of how to build suspense and atmosphere and tension and mystery and intrigue and what the hell happened to this person? What is this skeleton? What's this black spirit thing she saw in the blizzard? What the hell is he whispering with the clicking into her ear? That I always take as just that's what kind of possesses her to kill them, and him looking at her, I guess, gives her the word or the go-ahead, and then she kills everybody and herself. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous in this movie, but especially in the opening here, with the mountains, snow everywhere. Perfection. And we're just 22 minutes into this film. So that was in 1995, the 20-minute opener. Now we flash forward to 2018 in Missouri. And then we see James Sombre running, getting some cardio in, you know. Then he sits down, you know, at a restaurant, and he has a voucher for a free meal for his birthday. Now, I mean, let's just get it out of the way now. We find out that at the end, through this whole cult that worships the empty man and the vessel of the empty man, Paul, in the hospital, and the empty man needs to feed off of pain and loss and grief, which they end up revealing in the hospital at the end. Amanda tells James that he's only existed for 3 days. He's a tulpa. And that the cult created them through thought, repetition, fear. There's one other thing, right? Oh, I forget. But through all that, they were able to literally think someone into existence and write their whole life story that they remember and actually think is real. So when we see this opening scene with the birthday voucher, it's literally his birthday. It's his day of birth. This is his first day as a physical being, a tulpa that was created by the cult. Now, if that sounds all right to you, we can move on to the issue I have with the comics. If it doesn't, leave in the comments what you think about all that. Now, in the comic, James was a real person, and he was brainwashed heavily into thinking he was a tulpa so they can use his pain and suffering as to make him the new vessel for the empty man. That's what happens in the comics. I'm sorry, but I don't care what anybody says. That's not what happens in the movie. And David Pryor said he made his own vision here. He made it his own and changed some things. I think that's the better ending anyway. I think that's the better reveal of this story. That he's only existed for 3 days. Not that he was some guy in the cult or whatever and they brainwashed him into thinking he's a tulpa. And stuff like, I know that's in the comic, that's fine. But for the movie, that's not how I see it one bit. And no one will ever convince me otherwise. Now, the one thing I know people will point out is when he's talking to Stephen Root, you know, at the cult headquarters, where they have like their little pitch meetings and stuff. He says to him after his great monologue, we'll get there, and he says, I've never been here. And then Stephen Root replies, well, you must just have one of those faces. Now, I could see that as an argument people will use who think the comic and this are the exact same story. But no. The reason he says it's good to see you again was because he was created in this facility, in the cult's headquarters here. We see at the end of the movie, he's strapped to the chair that he was created in. So if he was there before. So it totally makes sense. James originated from this cult's place. And then he was let loose into the world. So Stephen Root's line of, it's good to see you again, and him saying, I've never been here, he doesn't remember that, obviously. But he has been here. So it makes sense what Root says to him. So I don't even want to hear that argument. So yeah, in 2018, we see Amanda, the neighbor's daughter, and James talking on a bench. And great dialogue here. The only thing I'll say, I mean, with Amanda, I don't like her haircut. I know that's a small little nitpick, but I don't know. I just don't like the bowl-headed shaped hair cut that she has. I don't know. I just looking at it, I never liked that. But her performance is great. And the dynamic between her and James is fantastic in this movie. And the same with James and Nora. So she's sitting there saying to him that, what if nothing is real? And he starts saying, what the fuck you talking about? Not in those words, but basically. And she says that through it's focus, repetition, intention. But I know there's another one in there that they say near the end. This is her just explaining this concept to him at the beginning. Now, I also like the whole subplot memory, past events that we get here throughout the movie interwoven of James, like I said, who's going through a lot of guilt from the car accident that killed his wife and son. And then we find out near the end, because we hear, "Where were you? Where were you?" in her voice a few times that James is hearing in this movie. And we found out that he was cheating on her with Nora. And the writing for that is great too, because it sets up the shock at the end when Nora picks the phone up, when James, after Amanda reveals the whole, truth of what's going on to him, and he doesn't know what to think, and you don't believe it. He calls Nora, and she answers, and she doesn't know who he is. And that shock is upped a lot more by the fact that they knew each other so intimately. Like, they made love, like they were having an affair. I forget if there was more than one time and stuff. I think it was going on a little bit. I don't know. It's been maybe, a year since I've watched this, but I think that adds a lot more to that reveal that we get, that she doesn't even know him because he never existed, and his thoughts and his backstory, his thoughts, his life were all thought into existence and put into his head. So then Amanda goes missing, and Nora calls James over. She's freaking out, and the cops show up. Now, this is another place where people differ on opinions, because the cop says to James that he's heard of him before, because in James's fake, backstory and history, he was a detective. So this black detective here, I forget his name, the actor, he's a good actor, I've seen him in a few things. He tells him that he has heard of him before. And another detective or cop says the same thing later on in the movie. So people could think that supports the theory that he was a real person. But no, again, for me, because if this cult can think of an entire human being into existence just through thought and intention and repetition and fear, then they easily can put false memories in Nora, in the detective, in both detectives, to make him continue on this little breadcrumb of a journey down the rabbit hole while he's going further into more grief and pain and suffering and getting prepped by the cult to become the empty man vessel. But yeah, so Amanda's missing, and again, breadcrumbs that she's leaving for him. A Pontifex Institute flyer, or whatever it is, she obviously left that behind for him to find, to give him a lead, to go down and find the cult and then become the empty man vessel in their ultimate plan. It's cool that it says Tulpa right on the back of it, so you get some foreshadowing right from the beginning. On the wall, it says, "The empty man made me do it," in animal blood. So then, because of how close they are and had an affair, that while it was happening, his fucking son and wife died in an accident. Oh, I can't imagine the grief this guy's feeling. I mean, totally not right of him to be cheating on his wife, but I mean, nobody in that situation deserves any of that. No one in James's family, him, the son, the mom, the wife, nobody. No one wins there. But she ends up asking, and he's pretty intrigued himself, to go find Amanda. So he ends up going to her high school and talking to a friend of hers, Devara. And she gets in the car with him. I love how she asks, for a cigarette, and he says, smoking's bad for you, but he's smoking. And cool little exchange of dialogue. And then she gives the whole flashback on the bridge, where Amanda, her, and a group of friends, all by Amanda's request, and again, this is her purposely leaving a little trail for James. But she makes them all blow into bottles on this bridge. And then she says, on the first night, you hear him. On the second night, you see him. And on the third night, he finds you. So she makes them all conjure the empty man. Because I know some people who don't understand what the the teenagers with the friends here being killed has to do with the story. Like, how does it fit? It could feel a little disjointed, but it does fit fine. Because, again, the Empty Man feeds on pain and suffering and stuff. And she's also Amanda. She's in the cult, and the rest of the cult, behind it, are trying to prep him through causing pain and suffering and reinforcement and, brainwashing to an extent that they thought this human being into existence and wrote a whole backstory of memories for him that are so convincing he thinks they're real and that he's a real human being. So Amanda would want her friends, quote unquote friends, I doubt they're real friends of hers, or maybe they were friends of hers and she got so messed up and brainwashed in this cult that she was willing to sacrifice them. That's probably likely what happened. But she purposely made them all summon the Empty Man. So that way we get that great scene when James goes the next day to the same bridge. And he ends up picking up a bottle and blowing on it. He thinks he sees something, and then he ends up going underneath the bridge, which I think is a really cool parallel to early in the movie in the first, in the cold open, when Paul breaks through the snow and falls down below the surface, and that's where he discovers the skeleton, has that traumatizing experience. I don't know if it was intended, but kind of cool that James is on the bridge, and then he has to go down below the surface, below the bridge, to see and it's such a creepy, unsettling image of all the friends hanging there, and it's all deemed a suicide. And again, it says, the Empty Man made me do it. I love the scene with the detective and James are sitting down, and he starts telling him that there's just some crimes that are unsolvable. And his whole little monologue here, it's not long, but it's a nice little speech. And he says there was a case of a mother who ended up feeding her baby to a pack of stray dogs because she swore that her baby was whispering to her, just like we see in the beginning with Paul whispering in the girl's ear, and just like we see in a little bit with Amanda whispering in the friend's ear. Now, who are the mother and the kid, though? Is that ever brought up? I don't know if I remember that. I think maybe that's just a story that he heard of, that, the Empty Man's been around for who knows how long, forever. It's ancient. It's like primordial. Then we get Devara's death scene, which is great, man. It is gnarly looking. Just the way it's edited, and there's not a lot of gore, but decent amount of blood. But it's kind of Psycho-esque. She goes into the little sauna or steamer or whatever, and again, the way the tension and suspense and the atmosphere is built here, and the sound design, it's fantastic. Are you kidding me? With the hissing of the steam, just filling up the room, and then she can't even see like a foot in front of her, and then she ends up seeing the Empty Man, and then she starts getting stabbed in the face really, really, really fast and repeatedly, like maybe like 24 times. And I like the fact too in this movie that the Empty Man can only be seen as like a manifestation by those that summon him and then end up being killed by them. As we see her in the shots after we see the Empty Man stabbing her, she's doing it to herself. She's just stabbing herself over and over again with the scissors. So I think that's fantastic too. And the same with the hangings with the kids under the bridge. They just hung themselves, but they thought that the Empty Man was killing them. Like, I like that whole thing too, that you see him and then you don't see him. So it is day one for James after conjuring the Empty Man. So that first night he hears him, he ends up grabbing a baseball bat. It's another suspenseful scene. He goes outside after hearing footsteps, and then he opens the door and his front door's ajar, and the shit's scared out of him. Great suspenseful scene there too. Like, all the scares in this movie, there's no fucking jump scares really. like, yeah, there might be like some jump moments, but there's built up to it. It's not just like your traditional stupid jump scare that's just reactionary. No, this builds its way up to its scares, and it does it excellently. So he ends up going to the Pontifex Institute to check this place out and see what the hell is going on, because if you can't tell, this plot's getting convoluted as shit already, and we're about halfway through this movie. He goes up to one of the girls behind the desk there, like the sign-in desk, I guess, for this like lecture that Stephen Root's character is about to give. And he says, like, how long have you been established? And she says, we've been established since 2013, but what we can offer you is as old as time. And then some of the things that are written down on, like, the paperwork that he's given says, I have a sense of health and well-being. Life itself is a kind of disease. An infection is a blessed event. Like, you're supposed to put yes or no, I guess. Disagree, agree. The brain can itch. Suicide is a form of thought control. These are the things that this cult are trying to put into all their members' heads. The entire universe is an erogenous zone is another one on there. That's a great one. Some more. Like, they're very thought-provoking but weird questions, and like to agree or disagree with. Nothing is binary, everything is fluid. Some truths are socially intolerable. The scientific method is a tool of oppression. If science says the sky is blue, it's more likely red. Menstruation is no basis by which to determine gender. And now his character is his backstory, written into existence for him, is that he's from San Francisco. So he mentions it a lot in this movie, like maybe 5-6 times or so throughout the movie. Like, if somebody, I forget exactly the circumstance, but he'll say, no, yeah, believe me, I know, I'm from San Francisco. Just little hints thrown in there that something's not quite right with James here. Oh, the great Stephen Root, he's not blind in this one. He ends up giving this whole lecture to, these cult members and also ones that are looking maybe to join this place. It's, regular cult shit. Then he has this conversation when he sits down with James, and his whole monologue here is just excellent. Like, probably the best performance in the film for me is Stephen Root's whole long monologue. I'm just going to play the audio because I can't explain it as well as he says everything. Then we'll dissect what he says afterwards.
You did say the empty man. That's right. It's an interesting phrase. You could say he called out to you. Or not. What does it mean? The empty man is a meditation. Focal point for the targeted manifestation of hidden energies. Distractions rob us of focus. Technology robs us of memory. Repetition robs us of comprehension. The child's game. If you say your name enough times, it becomes gibberish. That holds true for whole concepts, even entire bodies of thought. For example, take Nietzsche's old line, if you stare into an abyss, it also stares into you. Right? Well, that has been rendered meaningless through repetition. It's a refrigerator magnet. It's a cliche. It's harmless. But when was the last time you really thought about that? What is an abyss? And if you stare into it, why? What about it calls to you? If it stares into you, it stands to reason something in you must also be calling to it. And that, my friend, is anything but harmless, if you really reflect on it. So the question becomes, if profound meaning can be robbed of something by so simple a task as repetition, which is more fundamental, which is more true? Your name or the gibberish? That is the empty man.
Alright, so that is a lot to unpack, and we don't have time to dive into all of that, so I'm going to make it a bridge version here. So, basically, the way I'm taking this is that through repetition you can render anything meaningless, like he says with the kids game. You say your name over and over again, JT, 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 and then it starts being gibberish after a while. So he's saying the same thing is possible for entire, concepts and thoughts, which is what they did. It has ended up making him out of just thinking and using repetition. So after his talk with Stephen Root's character, Parsons, I think it's Parsons, he ends up meeting this guy, Garrett, who's like there for the cult or whatever, but like also like is willing to just give away like vital information to just a stranger. And he ends up telling him that there's a camp that the cult has down, I don't know, like a decent drive away. And there is a great transition shot. It's very Stanley Kubrick, like Shining when he looks down in the hedge maze, Jack, and it pans in on the actual hedge maze with Wendy and Danny there. It's the same thing. You see a map in his backseat of his car, and it ends up zooming in on the map, and then that becomes the trees as it pans and zooms in on his car driving. Like, that's a very cool transition shot. Let me tell you, I can't find a picture for the teddy bear, but there's a teddy bear in this, and he makes an appearance a few times, and he is creepy as shit. So he makes it to the camp, and then we get two great scenes back to back that are very, very chilling. The first is when he's looking around this camp, and he sees a video. Now, we see this person who's acting like possessed, and the glowing eyes, it's in night vision, like, it's really effective, it's really unsettling. That's, I guess, an early prototype of the vessel for the empty man, right? That's how I always take that, as this is like, patient zero, so to speak, of them trying to create a new vessel. Okay, so I definitely got confirmation on something I've talked to friends about, and wasn't sure of until just now, because I'm listening with headphones. Now, since this is very Lovecraftian, the empty man, the creature we see at the end, like the manifestation of him that goes into James and takes possession of him, is heavily, based on Nyarlathotep, the Lovecraft, deity, elder god, old one, whatever you want to call it. To such a crazy universe Lovecraft has. During the scene, which is one of my favorite scenes in this film, where he's at the camp, he's just saw the video, he's searching around, and then he sees a whole bunch of hooded people in this cult circling a campfire and chanting. Now, during the chanting, in the last part of the chant, they are saying Nyarlathotep. They are saying the actual name over and over again. They're saying Nyarlathotep, Nyarlathotep. Like, it's clear as day if you listen with headphones. So they're absolutely directly referencing Lovecraft's, story here. And then I love the effect of the fire going into the sky, and then you see the sky warp in like this really cool way, in like a glisten, and then the chanting stops, and then they turn and look right at him. And he, just like in the intro cold open, he steps backwards, the whole group steps forwards. He steps back again, they step forward again. And then he gives one of the greatest responses ever. He says, yeah, no, and just books it out of there. He runs, he's getting chased by this whole group of cult members, and he gets into his car. They're trying to, like, zombie style grab onto the car and shit. It is such a creepy scene. It is so effective, and I love it. Now, with the whole fire going into the sky and the cool, like, warping of the sky effect, I always take that as that's kind of time splitting, or a parallel universe of some sort, a rift in time, because later on near the end, we see James in two places at the same time. So we see like the future self of him, and then we see the past self when he first came to the cult place, and he sees the people blowing on the bottles. They're sitting in the circle. Then they hear a sound, and they look to the side where the sound came from. That's James in the end of the movie. But then he hears that sound when he's there in the past. If anyone's following that and has seen this movie, is that how you take that? Because that's the only way I look at it, is that it's some type of time warp or time loop or alternate, split dimension, that he's there in both the past and in the future. Then it's the second night, we get the creepy scene with that creepy-ass teddy bear. His doorbell rings and in the night, and he ends up going open. He has his baseball bat in hand again from the first night, and he opens the door, and there's that creepy-ass teddy bear from the camp from mad far away that's there, like, sitting right in front of his door. This is another great shot here. When James goes to the hospital, and he sees Paul in a coma in the hospital bed, and he looks in, and then he turns away, walks away, and then we see a bunch of cult members that were leaning down, like in a praying position that you couldn't see in frame. They pop up from out of frame. It's such a cool shot, and they're in front of the bed with Paul in there. So Paul is the vessel for the empty man after what happened in 1995. So for all these years, he's been taking the strain of being the vessel for the empty man. There's only so much that you can take. But this is the whole reason they created James the Tulpa, to make him the vessel. That way he can be the vessel for a long time. And because Paul, their current vessel, isn't going to last long, so they need to find a replacement. Then we have the whole reveal in the hospital, where James comes back and he has that talk with the creepy-ass nurse. We find out at the end that a lot of the hospital staff are part of this cult that worship the empty man. And Amanda drops the whole bombshell on James that he was created through repetition and thought and fear and concentration, and was created 3 days ago, which absolutely fucks his mind up on the spot. Are you kidding? And he doesn't want to believe it. He thinks that she's fucking with him. Until he calls Nora, and she has no idea who he is. And that's where he really starts to lose it. He starts losing grasp of reality, and his whole world and universe comes crumbling down. Everything he ever understood or thought he understood just comes crashing down like dominoes. That's the actual goddamn phrase it took to the end of the movie. Well, this is where she says it like a lot. Thought plus concentration plus time equals flesh. And I'm sorry with the comic supporters of it being the same story. They brainwashed him. He was a real person. Nope. I'm sorry. It's just not the way it is in this film. It is not the way it's portrayed. It is not the way that it's shown. It's not the way the story is written. She says to him multiple times, "We made you. We wrote an entire biography for you and focused intently on it for several sessions. We thought you into existence." Like, she's saying all of this. So, I mean, yeah, their argument is that they're trying to just make him break and trying to make him believe that this is true, that he is a tulpa, but he's really a human being that was part of the cult, and they're trying to make him think that this is really happening, that he really was created 3 days ago. I'm sorry, I just don't subscribe to that theory. And this is when she says to him, just, let go of this false reality so you can become part of a stronger reality and be our empty man. And then he lets go, and he ends up in that part when I was saying it's like a time loop, where he's carrying the red book and he's walking down the hallway, and that's when the circle hears him and turns and says, "We hear you, we're listening." And then he's also up on the balcony from the past. That's the only way I can take it. Then we see the chair that he was quote-unquote born in, with the light shining down on it. It's a really cool shot. Then all of a sudden he finds himself from looking at the chair to being in the cave from the very beginning, looking at the ancient skeleton. And then out of the skeleton, which it looks great, and again the sound design with like the bones crunching and stuff. Now I don't know what this is, the creature at the end, but the design looks really cool. There are a decent amount of good practical effects in this end sequence here, but there is some CGI. But for a Lovecraft story and for what they needed to do here, you need it. And it doesn't look bad at all. Like, it looks pretty damn good. But is this the Empty Man? Or a manifestation of it? Or is this Nyarlathotep that the cult summoned? Leave in the comments, let me know on that. That's a theory. The creature, for lack of better understanding, ends up doing the classic demon move of spitting a bunch of shit down your throat, and then you become possessed. And then we see some flashbacks of the funeral for his family and him having the affair with Nora. That's where we get the reveal of the affair happened when they died in the car accident, and where were you? And for the ending, James appears in the hospital room with Paul. And Paul the effects on him look great too. The way how sickly he looks and thin and malnourished, that looks really cool. And James ends up pulling out a gun and blows his fucking brains out. Like, shoots him a few times. It looks great. The blood spatter on the wall, like where it blew backwards onto, I think it's a painting, right? Earlier at the camp, doesn't he see a painting or a mural, and it looks just like the blood spatter here? So that's a great little link there. James ends up walking outside the hospital room where he just blew Paul's brains out, and we see like a dozen hospital staff all get down and bow and pray to him and say, repeatedly, you transmit, we receive. You transmit, we receive. He is the new Empty Man. Credits. This movie is a total mindfuck. This movie is just genius in every way. It works 100% for me. I know it will not work for everybody. Like, I know that from the first viewing. I said this is going to be very divisive, and then it never really got seen to be that divisive. Now it's been getting more of a cult following in the last 2 years, maybe. But yeah, The Empty Man from 2020. This has been long. This has been a deep fucking exploration of the craziness and Lovecraftian horror, mystery, time loop, parallel universe, other dimensions, whatever went on here. Alright, boils and ghouls. Hope everyone's having a great morning, afternoon, or night. This has been Horror After Dark Podcast and the Sack with JT. Good night, everybody.